Hello guys, hope you all are having a great day so far. In this lecture, we are going to be talking about note-taking, and this is coming right after we have talked about lectures in our videos so far. So, in this lecture, I will be talking about tips for taking notes, how to better improve your note-taking skills, as well as talking at the very end about whether you should be typing versus handwriting your notes. To begin with, first I want you all to pause, take a second to think about this question. Why take good notes in the first place? Before I share the answer. All right. So, in order to take good notes, or why should we take good notes in the first place? Note taking really serves two big purposes. The first is to learn the material during the lecture. So when you are noting down the lecture's information, especially the key points, you are better learning that material. From, whether it's typing or handwriting, noting that stuff down will imprint that material in your memory. And the other big reason is to store information for future studying. So we'll talk about next week too about for the very difficult classes that you will take, why it might be a good idea to revise your notes before an exam. And so this would be, in order to revise your notes, you have to have good notes to begin with. And so storing this material in the future will help you with revising your notes and to study for exams before an exam or study the material before an exam. So. Now I want to ask you all, take a second, pause, and think about this question. What are some tips for better note taking? All right. So we will talk about this question for pretty much the entire lecture. Um, First, it is important to get uh, some things out of the way with note taking. First is that it is literally impossible to take perfect notes. Right? So we speak about 120 words a minute, but we can only write down 20 words per minute. So we literally cannot note down everything that the lecturer is saying. So we have to therefore think about what information we want to store. So note taking, it is a trade-off between spending your attention on understanding the content versus writing it down. Right? So ideally, this is the ideal case, is that the lecturer gives you all some time to write down information before moving on to a new topic or speaking again. This is the ideal, right? Because we can't multitask. And so when I'm trying to write down information, I'm losing the content that the lecturer is then saying. So it would be ideal to have a pause, but oftentimes in university classes, you'll find that the lecturer will just speak for 55 minutes without ending or without any pause. And so sometimes you need to determine what is best for you. Sometimes you want to focus more on writing down every little detail, and sometimes you want to focus on just writing down the most significant key points. So in terms of writing down every detail, this might be a good idea for things like the directions to a scientific experiment, or if you just want to write down a bunch of anatomy facts where there isn't really any key big ideas, it's just a lot of factual information that you just have to commit to memory. But most of the time, you want to spend your attention on trying to understand what the lecturer is saying and write down only the significant ideas. So, good note taking, therefore requires fast handwriting. It requires good focus, and so we'll talk in the future about how to have good focus, but things like good sleep, for example. And it also requires rephrasing what the instructor says. This is because when you rephrase what the instructor says, you are thinking more deeply about the content and testing whether you really do understand it, right? If you are able to put the information into your own words or new words, that is a good sign that you have some understanding of the material. Rephrasing also makes it to where you have to pay more attention to the lecturer, right? Versus in the case of like just writing down everything verbatim for what the instructor says. In that case, you may not have to put more attention, and you may find yourself wandering in your mind. So, in order to speed up our note taking, there are some very helpful sort of shorthand methods that you can use. And so, this is an example of all sorts of different abbreviations for words that you can write down. Y'all can take a second and pause and look at all these. For me personally, whenever I take notes, I use this sort of stuff all the time, right? So instead of writing, for instance, because, I'll just write down BC. And I've done this so many times to where I know what BC means if I see that in my notes. Some other useful shorthands that you can use in your notes is writing symbols to leave messages to your future self. So for instance, this is what I personally do, is when I'm taking notes on some material and I am just, I don't understand the material, I might put one question mark or two question marks. Two question marks if I just completely don't understand anything that this material is saying. Maybe one question mark if I just have one missing detail that I have to understand. But these shorthands again are helpful to just very quickly take notes while also still having a idea of what you need to revisit in the future. So now we'll talk about how to record the important ideas, because this is what you want to do most of the time. So how do you find the important ideas, right? This is difficult because in order to kind of know what is and is not important, you kind of have to have some background knowledge about the topic that the lecture is at. So, to find important ideas, one thing you can do is check the syllabus and readings for key topics, right? So if I'm in a class that is focused specifically on, I don't know, causes of World War II, and we're having a lecture, and part of the lecture is on causes of World War II, then that's probably really important, right? So looking at syllabi readings, another way to see if a idea is important is if the instructor is continuously repeating an idea. Repetition. Another tip is to listen if the instructor's tone or volume is changing to emphasize an idea, right? So if I am suddenly just being more louder, or if I am really trying to emphasize something, that's a sign that it can be more important. You also want to listen to the instructor, listen to them if they are pausing and slowing down to define an idea, right? If they are very deliberately trying to explain what an idea means, that's a sign that it is very important to them. And then sometimes the instructor will just straight up say that this is important or to remember this, uh, and so on. So now we'll talk about one of the biggest tips for note taking, and that is to try and take notes based on the organizational pattern of a lecture. So what does this mean? Almost all the time in a lecture, and not just a lecture, but also a reading or a text, there is some sort of structure or outline that the instructor has made for that lecture. And in the ideal scenario, the instructor would share with you that outline that they have for that lecture. Oftentimes, though, this is not the case, and so then you would either have to ask the professor themselves or to learn the organizational pattern. Right, so on my screen right here, this is an example of a structure or an outline for a lecture. In this case, you can see that the topic is at the very top, why cook meat? And so, from this very high top question, how to cook meat or why cook meat, you can see that there's three branching details of A says kill bacteria, E says flavor, and L says tenderness. And then from these three key details are a bunch of details that stem underneath that have more information that connects to those topics, right? So this is an example of an outline that notes down all the key ideas and how they relate to one another. So this is an example of something that you might want to make in your own note taking. And so to do this, I would say try to learn the first two levels, right? And so that would be at the very least the one single central main topic or question of that lecture or reading, noting that down at the very top, and then having a second level that is just a bunch of different headers that have different key details, the most significant details that lead to that single top level topic. And so to do this, you'd also want to use headers to organize your notes. So we can do this with a little tree diagram like this. You can also do it just much more simply with just a bulleted list. So this is something that I typed for outline a organizational structure for the past two lecture, or sorry, this lecture on note taking and the past lecture on lectures. So you can see here, I have the day two study skills. I don't have a main topic, and so I should actually here have a main topic. But I have a bunch of key details, right? So like things like tips for lectures, tips for taking notes, and then from these key details, I have smaller details that relate to the main topics. Um, and I have also a bunch of different headers, bulleted lists. And so this organization that I have here is going to be, excuse me, will be very simple for me to go back to my notes in the future and learn from my notes. So this is an example of what you would want to make on paper or on your laptop. So how do you create or learn this organization? In the case that they do not, the instructor does not give you the outline for the lecture, the best guess for whatever the main topic of the lecture is just whatever they say first. The second level, like I said, is just the main points that relate to the main topic. And then also for learning how to do something, for instance, how to do the quadratic equation, the second level can just be steps for the process, right? So maybe in a math class, for my notes, I might have just at the very top, it says quadratic equation. And then my headers, the really big main details that I have these big headers for, are just first step, second step, third step. And then in my notes, I note down what do I do in the first step, what do I do in the second step, and the third step, and so on. And then you can also note down the justification for the steps, right? So why do I do this first step in this way? Why do I do the second step of the quadratic equation in this way? To put into your notes. So yeah. Also, you can understand or identify the significant ideas from verbal cues, right? So we've talked about this before. If the instructor says, "Now I'm finished with my first cause of World War II, let's move on to the second," right? That means that the second cause of World War II is coming up. And so you can then note that down in your notes. If they don't, then listen for verbal cues like the second reason, moving on, next, right? So these transitional phrases are cues for you to understand when the instructor is moving on to the next important idea. So yeah. Another tip for note taking is trying to connect ideas to broader themes or broader connections in the course, or inside that lecture itself. So this is a very good strategy to really get a deep understanding, right? Of not just having a shallow knowledge of factual information, but having a really deep understanding, is to try and connect ideas to other ideas that you've learned in the past. This is a good idea if you have the attention and focus to do that. Oftentimes in a class during a session in a lecture, you might not have the time to make those sorts of connections. But if you do, then it's a good idea. You can just ask yourself throughout the lecture, do I understand how the broader topic relates to what the instructor says, right? So, for instance, if the broader theme of the course is causes of World War II, do I understand how this one single class relates to that broader theme of causes of World War II? And so we'll talk about in the next week how to revise your notes for the most difficult classes. You can do this. This is probably a better time to do it when you're revising your notes. Because when you're revising your notes, then you have all the time in the world to then make those broader connections. So yeah. And the last big tip for taking notes is this cycle of self-regulated learning that I introduced to you all last lecture. So again, what this is for whenever you are trying to improve in anything, you first want to plan out what you want to do. So set some goals, ideally the SMART goals that we talked about before in week one, or week two, about the specific goals that are measurable, that are time bound, where you have a specific time that you will implement these strategies. And also prioritize the strategies that you benefit the most from, right? So if you want to improve yourself with note taking, I would just pick one or two. So maybe my single thing that I want to improve on is I want to start using headers and organizing my notes better. Maybe I want to make that tree diagram, something like that. So pick the strategies that you would most benefit from. During class, you enact those strategies or the single strategy and you monitor how you are doing, right? So if you notice that you are unable to make headers and an outline for the lecture, then notice that and then ask yourself why. And then at the end of the class, you want to then reflect. So was I successful in doing the strategies? Why or why not? Did they help me? Did they not help me? So this is an example that I typed out here that has a written plan. So I have note-taking goals. I have organized my notes with at least one title and two headings. So here I'm making a sort of a SMART goal where I have the M measurable in this goal was saying that I have one title and two headings. Um, then my second goal here is writing a question mark next to the 2 points that I don't understand. So again, I'm being very small here. I just have two strategies, right? I don't have five strategies because that would just overwhelm me and the change would not be sustainable. Then at the bottom, I have some reflection questions. So was I successful implementing my goals and how could I do better next time? So yeah, this is everything that I have for how to learn how to take better notes. Now we'll talk about a important question, which is whether you should type or you should do handwriting for your notes. So I first want you all to take a second, pause and think about this question. What do you all think is better, typing your notes or handwriting your notes? All right, so it turns out that at least my answer is that it is kind of complicated. So in terms of research and studies that have looked into this question, it is kind of mixed. So there was a famous study done in 2014 that found that students who typed notes learned less compared to handwriting. However, there were a few studies done after this major 2014 study that contradicted this result. So some studies done after the 2014 study found that there was no difference in typing versus handwriting your notes. So Daniel Willingham, which is a psychologist and was the author of one of the books that I read and then put his information into this course. Willingham says that, in his opinion, uh, he says to do not use laptops because they are very distracting, right? So like what we've been talking about, you might be trying to take notes, but then you might feel yourself compelled to go on YouTube or go on social media. John Dunlosky and Reagan Gurung, which are two psychologists who wrote another book that I read to make this course, these two psychologists say also to don't use laptops if you do get distracted, but if you are a very fast typer, then you can use laptops, right? And the reason why is if you are much faster at typing versus handwriting, then you'll just be able to have more information in your notes because you're able to record information faster. So, based on these expert opinions, you can say that in most cases, typing is not a good idea if you get distracted from your laptop, but if you're faster at typing, then it can be a good idea to type. I'll share now my own opinion, right? So, what do I do? What does my sister do? So, my sister, she just graduated from Virginia Tech in engineering. So in terms of what I did do and still do whenever I learn anything, is I do use my laptop to type instead of handwriting. The reason why for me is because I am very fast at typing versus handwriting, and I have really bad handwriting. Um, and also because for me personally, I'm better able to organize my notes and refer back to them in the future by typing. Because at least for me, I find that it is very easy for me to organize information in like Google Docs and in my Google Drive, um, as opposed to a physical notebook, where for me at least, it is easier to just have a complete mess in a physical notebook. My sister does the complete opposite, and so she would always have for every class one single notebook, and she would have all the notes in that notebook, in that physical notebook that she'd be writing in. And so, I would say that for you all, choose whichever one works best for you, right? If you're faster at handwriting, then just, do handwriting. I would say that don't think you need to have fancy technology to be successful, or to be a fast typer, right? If you're still learning how to type fast, and that's okay. Um, Another thing too is that, let's say that you do get distracted from your laptop, but you still want to type your notes. In this case, it's still a good idea to really think about if you want to type your notes, right? The reason why is we should not have to rely on willpower, um, to not get distracted, right? So if you do get distracted, it's just much easier to change your environment by just turning off your laptop and not even using it and just using paper to handwrite instead of using willpower to resist being distracted while typing. Um, so yeah. One last thing we'll talk about is about math, right? So let's say you want to type your notes on your computer, but you have a math class, and you might have a math class that has a bunch of weird symbols that do not show up on your keyboard, like what's on my screen right here, right? If this was one of the equations that you're learning about, how the heck would you put this in your keyboard? If you are wondering how to do so, there is a free program that's called LaTeX. Um, and so, in math classes, you could just choose to just handwrite your notes. And that's what my sister did, because she took tons of engineering and mathematical classes. So handwriting works, but you can also learn how to use LaTeX technology. Um, I can share if you all want, you can ask me for websites that do this, and I can share with you all these websites. They are free. You just have to learn how to do it. Um, but yeah, so that is everything that I have for note taking. If you all have any questions about note taking or lectures or anything else, please ask me. And yeah, that is the end of this lecture. Hope you all have a great day. All right.